Hey guys, Kim here, and you are tuned into Kim E, the Diabetes MP, a place where healthcare professionals can come and learn more about diabetes care in an effort to improve their patient outcomes. Now, I have mentioned in the previous video that May is Older Americans Month, and I thought that it would be great to sit and speak to you about the older adult and diabetes. We're not just going to focus on the Americans. We're going to talk about all older adults, because being that we are living in America, this is the land of immigrants, and we see people from many different cultures, many different backgrounds. And so speaking about that, I really do want to lean into our social determinants of health, the unique SDOH of the older adult and diabetes. Now, before we get into everything, I do want to show you the trailer of Shift Nursing's new documentary, Who Cares? Now, I have spoken a lot about this documentary. I've made a whole video about this with my live reactions to the documentary, but I do want to insert the trailer so you can get just a little taste of what the documentary is over. And if you find that you want to watch it in its entirety, I will link that down in the description box. So we're going to watch that, and then we're going to come back and we'll get into it.
If you own a pair of Crocs, even though you know they're super ugly, you might be a nurse.
I'm Whitney. I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner in Fargo, North Dakota. I'm Lakota. I grew up in the country on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I see patients across the lifespan for treatment of mental health conditions and substance use disorders.
I don't think she's ever given herself enough credit for the impact that she makes on other people.
Yeah, she's tolerable.
She is going to have vulnerable conversations with people in a way that makes them feel like they're cared for.
I always say it's the essence of Whitney. You have to just understand how really good she is.
Asking people how they want their care and what they think is possible, because that is communicative of respect rather than compliance.
Riding in my Indian car.
Okay guys, let's get into it. Now, if you have been watching my channel for any amount of time, okay, you know that social determinants of health, SDOH, that's my thing. And I preach about it, I speak about it all the time, because here's the thing about SDOH in general, and then we'll talk about it in regards to the older adult. SDOH is the non-clinical factors that affect a patient. So these are the things that the patient, where the patient lives, how they work, how they play. These are the things that affect them in their care that we probably do not see when they come into our office. This is where the person lives. This is where they spend the majority of their time. Okay? When patients come in and they see us, we get really a snapshot. We only see them for a little bit of time, but then they go out into the world and they live their life. All those things that are in their life, that's social determinants of health. These statistically, I want to say that it affects up to about 40 to 50% of the person's care. And so this is something that we cannot ignore. Okay? And a lot of the times when we are putting out all of these prescriptions and we're putting out all these orders, we have to consider what this patient's life looks like when they're not in our clinic. Okay. Now, the thing about the clinical, the medical stuff is that we went to school for that. And many of us can ramble that stuff off. And then we wonder why our patients are not getting to goal, or why our patients are not, quote unquote, doing what they're being told, which you shouldn't have that mindset with your patients because they are humans, but that's neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is, if you do not consider what this patient is dealing with outside of your office, you will not get the patient outcome that you want. It's the only way. So that's my soapbox. Let me jump off of it and let's talk a little bit about SDOH when we're considering the older adult, okay? Now, some things to consider when you are thinking about the older adult. And again, Like I mentioned in the previous video, this is not an exclusive list. This is just if I'm just sitting here and I am talking to a newer nurse practitioner or a person who is new to taking care of this population, these will be the high points that I would bring up to a person, okay? It is not the only thing, but it is a big part of what you need to be thinking about in addition to other things. So I made a list. It's just about 5 little areas. And so we'll just talk about them a little bit. So I'm going to read them off. So the first one is socioeconomic, okay? Now, with the older adult, especially a person who is retired or elderly, you're going to come in contact with a lot of people who are on fixed incomes. Not everybody. But for a person like me who has typically worked with marginalized populations, pretty much everyone that I see, they don't have a money tree in the backyard, okay? And once a person stops working, they get a certain amount from their retirement. They get a certain amount for Social Security, and of course Medicare, and in some cases Medicaid has kicked in for them. They do not have a lot of money to be driving to many appointments. They don't have a lot of money for multiple copays and any medicine, the newest medicine on the market. You have to consider that, okay? You're working with a lot of people who will be on a fixed income. Secondly, speaking about socioeconomic, also consider transportation. Now, some people are able to drive and get around and do exactly what they want to do. But there are many people who may not have a running car. There may be many people who have not driven in many years for whatever reason. Maybe their vision isn't good, especially if you're dealing with an older patient who may have had long-standing diabetes. They may have, some vision loss. You don't know, but just even a person who has no diabetes, no diagnosis of diabetes, maybe some people have decided to not drive, especially maybe later in the evening or even at night. That's something that you need to keep in mind. I've had a number of patients who the way that they get to their appointments is because a family member takes them, maybe a child, and many of their children still work. So that limits when they can come to appointments. I've had many people where their children had to actually take off of work, right, to bring them. And so you have to consider that, especially when you have somebody, when we have these rules in our office that are like, if you're 15 minutes late, you're going to have to reschedule. Now you need to consider that person who maybe their daughter or their son had to take off of work, and maybe they're taking them on their lunch break and they got caught in traffic. Maybe that's the reason why they're 20 minutes late. Now, understand you do have to have boundaries in your office, but you do need to communicate to your patients. If you are running late, please just reach out to us so we can hold your spot for you, right? And this may not be every person, but you do need to consider that when a person's transportation is not solely up to them. Consider that. Housing and food insecurity. Now, this is something that is a huge thing that I see with the population that I take care of. You may have, and again, not all people, but could be a big portion of your population. This is why you have to assess for this. You have many senior communities. In my area, there are a lot of senior communities that are like income based and they have to apply to get in. You have your Section 8 housing that is reserved. Some of those are reserved specifically for the elderly. They have to be a certain age to get in. They can only make a certain amount of money. And of course, if it's an apartment building, if they don't have anything available, then you can't move somebody into something that's not available. So you have people that may be on waiting lists. Maybe people are, living with their children or family members or a friend, not having secure housing. And then that also can play into food insecurity. Maybe someone has housing, but they don't have enough money to be able to buy the proper food and nutrition each month. An area that I work in, it's considered a food desert, and a food desert, which I've probably explained on this channel before, is where there's no like grocery stores in the area. Like there's probably only like corner stores or there's just gas stations, and you can't go grocery store shopping there. You know, all that stuff is packaged. It's not the best. It's high in sodium, carb heavy. You know, you can't really sustain yourself off of that. And so they're really helping people to navigate that, really tapping into social work and having them help with that as well. But those are things that you do need to consider when you're dealing with the older adult, because especially if they're not able to drive to a place, or maybe, you know, getting on the highway makes them nervous. You know, I can only imagine someone's granny trying to get on, you know, I-20, you know, like, I mean, do we really expect them to do that? No, you know what I'm saying? And so they stay in their little area, you know, and you have to assess, do you have everything that you need in your area? Psychosocial. Now, I spoke a little bit about this in the previous video about the psychosocial status as well, but you are dealing with a population that probably will be thinking more about their mortality than the younger generation. You know, when you're in your 20s, you feel like you're invincible, you're gonna live forever. But when you hit your 70s and you're starting to have friends pass away, you may even have children that have passed away. Your parents are gone, your siblings are starting to pass away. You start to think about, my time here is not what it was when I was 20, right? And anybody can pass away at any age. You're dealing with a population that's probably thinking about that, and that does bring a lot of people down. There's loneliness that comes a lot, because you have to think too, some people, you know, as we talked about, may not have the transportation to go and do the social things that they used to do, may not be able to do that, you know, and then their adult children may be working a lot, may live in other states. And so you will find that you'll find a lot of people that are lonely, and you have to think about that. Also, depression and anxiety is something that is high in this population, because think about it as well. This is one thing that can bring that up, you know, declining health status. Thinking about, I used to be so active and now I'm not, you know. Anyone could start to feel down about that. And so you got to consider that as well. Something to think too, here's something to really think about when you start to talk about like going to a therapist or a counselor. You have to also understand the generation that you're talking about, because one thing that I have found with a lot of people in this generation, not all, but enough to make a note of this, is that many people, older generations really did not see going to a therapist as a good thing. You know, in their minds, if you went to a therapist, even if you got on medication for depression, you were quote unquote crazy. I don't like to use that term, but that's what has been told to me. And many of you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So you really, there's a stigma that comes with it. So you really have to sit down and have a conversation and normalize it for them. Because that may be exactly what they need. It's just to be able to talk to somebody and to let out all the things that they're going through. And lastly, cultural considerations. Now, again, as much as I talk about SDOH, I talk about cultural considerations, okay? There is no one size fits all. And again, we live in a country where you will take care of someone who has a different cultural background than probably you, probably other patients that you see, and you do need to keep that in mind. Now, I live in a bigger city area that has, it's like a melting pot, okay? So this is something that I think about all the time, you know? I see a lot of minorities, different minorities, and I have to consider that, and also that's a sign of respect as well. And if a person feels disrespected, they're probably going to shut down from you. So you do need to consider this. This is not something you need to overlook. If a person feels disrespected, they're not going to respect you. And that means they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to care to be taken care of by you. And that's something you need to think of. I've had many patients to tell me that they felt like their providers did not listen to them, and that if you're not going to listen to me, I'm not going to listen to you. That's quite honestly, I've heard that so many times, y'all. And so you got to consider who you're talking to and the audience that you're talking to, especially with this older generation. You can find them to be more traditional. So you do have to incorporate their cultural preferences. And my thing about this is that typically, and I actually teach and do a whole training over this, like cultural sensitivity and things like that. But typically the average provider doesn't see every culture known to man. You tend to have a prominent 1 or 2 populations that you see. Because it's such a low number, you gotta make it your business to know who you're taking care of, okay? So if you happen to see a high Korean population, but you're not Korean, you owe it to yourself to learn about Korean culture and traditions and to come into your clinic respectful of them. That goes for anybody. That is, if you see a high African population or a high Mexican population or a high African American population, it would behoove you to not learn more about the culture that you very well see every single day. And so definitely these 5 things are things that you definitely need to keep in mind. Again, it's not all inclusive. There are other things that you should also consider, but these are these heavy hitters that I see a lot of people overlooking that would really help you in your day-to-day patient seeing. All right, guys, that's all I have for you. It was enough, I believe. Check the description box because I'm going to have a lot linked in the description box from relevant standards of care, relevant videos for you, as well as the link to the Shift documentary, Who Cares? Definitely would suggest that you watch that. And again, I appreciate you for tuning in. And if you're not already, go ahead and like and subscribe this video. Again, I appreciate you for tuning in and going on this ride with me. If you could do me a favor, go ahead and like this video. Also subscribe if you're not already. Ding that notification bell so you do not miss an upload. You have been sitting here with Kim E, the Diabetes MP, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.